One of the first things that Nicholas Wright and I came up with, and it's actually more Nick's invention, was that the way that we were going to get away with having arias that didn't feel like they were stopping action was to have these things called links that join one scene to another, like a sort of joint, basically, and that each one was going to have its own distinct musical identity, but that it was going to focus in on another element of her character and deliver us from one scene to another. So that it's not scene change music, but it's sort of arias with a thrust. And so in Act 1, for instance, there are 4 of them, and they each have their own kind of. So the first one is this really jagged, like brass, kind of aggressive information. She's talking about getting out of one town and moving to another, and it's her basically. I was conceiving of it as packing your bag really quickly, like trying to get out of town. And then a little bit later, she is at a bar and she gets recognized by someone and kind of pushes him away, and then has a moment where she thinks about kind of anonymity and how you can be anyone. And she says, if you're having a drink with your friends in the bar, are you the same person as you are at home? Are you the same person that you are at school or whatever? And so it's against this drone, just these 3 notes or 2 pitches that last for about a minute, and she. So there's a sense that these notes are the constant, and then if you put that out against it, it sounds like this, or if you put that out, so there's a sense of shining different lights on the same object. And then there's one that towards the end of the act, when she gets kind of caught, and at that point, she occupies the entire middle register of her voice, and the orchestra is just up here. So we have 2 contrapuntos and 2 piccolos that just make way for her, so it's the antagonistic set of sounds. So those were actually some of the first things that I wrote, because I knew that all the music on either side of it had to relate in some way to that. One of the big pieces of architecture that happens in the story and in the libretto and I hope in the music is that this is a woman who exists in fragments, and she has all these different identities that are not just cosmetic, right? She herself has to play a part in each one, and she creates all these different characters. In that sense, she's sort of like an opera composer. She's the authoress of all these different kind of 3-dimensional characters. But whenever she's addressing us, we realize that it's her speaking as her, and these are the links. But when she sings those links, all the intervals that she sings are like kind of scattered around and difficult to learn. They make sense harmonically, but it's all very jagged, right? And if you drew the line, it would look kind of like this. And then at the end, when she has this revelation that it was Mom's fault all along, the way that I dealt with that was by completely divorcing her from that kind of intervallic content. So, at the ends, her just lines are almost more traditional. And the pathway towards that was that when she realizes that it was her mother's fault, all of her kind of gnarly music that kind of does that is answered in exact negative by the hymn Praise Must All the King of Heaven, whose refrain goes, in my harmonization, so it's just scales, and that then we do that, opened up this, it's basically that, which sounds sort of like a cheap ending, but I think it works. So one of the difficulties about the character of Mark is that he is clearly sort of a sexual aggressor, and he sexually assaults her at the end of Act 1. And the trick about it is to keep him on stage in a nuanced way and not say this is an absolute villain and monster, but also to always acknowledge that everything has changed after that point, that you can never really see anyone in the same way. So we had this kind of beautiful Nick gave me a beautiful text, so this is sort of a few weeks after he assaults her and she tries to kill herself, but she's still married to him. And the text is him trying to figure out some way to kind of lure her into some form of communication with him, some form of apology. And the text implies that he takes a walk out in the garden in the morning, and he startles a deer, and then he thinks of her as the deer, and it's this kind of sappy thing. And what I thought I would do was write something very beautiful, but without any bass in it. So there's no grounding to what he's saying. So the orchestra just does. It's not unbeautiful, but he sings. So there's no reinforcement for him at all, right? Because the bad version is, where it has that operatic kind of, I don't want to say safety net, but it has a sense of groundedness to it. So in this particular case, I thought, and it's vocally risky too, is to make the baritone the lowest voice that's happening. Everything else is like really pointillistic. I mean, on a piano, it sounds like I'm just playing, but it's like the strings divided up in this really specific way, and random bells in the middle of the part. So there's a complicated scene at the end of the first act where they're on what's ostensibly their honeymoon, although she's of course there against her will, and they've been on a cruise ship for 6 or 7 days. So again, there's this element of confinement, and over the course of this scene, he becomes drunk and he starts to kind of paw at her, and then eventually kind of just straight up sexually assaults her, and then she wriggles out from under him and then goes to the bathroom and tries to kill herself with a glass that she breaks in the sink. And that shape from this kind of hollow confinement at the beginning towards the end was very challenging, because you have to deal with such sensitive things, and the music can't really tell you what's going on, because that would be, I think, kind of crass is not the wrong word, is not the right word, it's just inappropriate. And so I needed to trust the production to do the work of this, and to trust, the music tells you that something's wrong, but it doesn't necessarily indicate what precisely is happening. So what we end up with is a sense of registral extreme, where again the entire bass drops out of everything, and we're left with this very pulsing, and it moves through all the keys and kind of chatters around, but there's never any center to it, so it feels like seasick and kind of nauseous. And then eventually, in a kind of perverse way, when he pushes her onto the bed, there's just this gigantic C major chord with this other thing on top of it, and it's meant to feel like this, like the world is upside down, like the biggest kind of purest sound has become perverse. And so that was one element of it. And then another thing that I was really clear about was that from the beginning of the opera, she has this material that represents her sense of kind of freedom and caprice, and it's always going to. I'm playing it terribly. I'm going to whatever, the worst pianist in the world, but it's this kind of twittery filigree, and that for her represents like looking to the next place. And then at the end, when he starts getting drunk enough to really start being quite aggressive with her, he sings over that material. So we realize the perversion of his kind of co-opting her. He says that he gets a huge thrill out of watching her steal. So the whole thing for me was about a move from just this plain confinement into his taking her music away from her, essentially. When it was agreed that the Met would commission this piece, and we sort of had put together a design team, and it was Mark Grimmer from 59 Productions and Julian Crouch, who's not a stranger, neither is a stranger to the Met. Within about 24 hours, Julian called back, trying to back out, because he realized that we were going to have to design a Foxhunt. and a Foxhunt, you know, in the plot of the thing, it's a pivotal changing point, and you can't not have it. There's no other way to do it, because it links up her relationship with her horse, which is the most important one in her life, with her relationship to feeling pursued. So she starts to identify with the fox, even though she's on a horse, who's an element of such a pursuit, with her anxiety, with blood, and so everything kind of comes together in that moment, and it was an unavoidable thing. And so we were in denial about it for a couple of years, and but one of the things that Julian and Mark came up with quickly is that this idea that the set had to be made of these floating panels that could move quickly and could receive projection that would change. So technically, it's really interesting to have had that conversation so early in the process, because it freed me up a little bit to work entirely abstractly in terms of what's happening. So even though I don't always do that, what happens is that the chorus sings these a selection of texts without any rhythm, as in they can do them in their own free time as long as they outline these big chords. So you kind of going up, and then once the whole perspective changes and she's kind of underneath the hooves, it does it's sort of the opposite. Big descending motifs, and then in between those things, she talks to us again and says, you know, she addresses the fox in a weird way, and she says, you know, run for your life, get out of here. So the hunt was, I think, for me, the most challenging compositionally. But the weirdest thing about it is that once I wrote it, we never changed it. It actually, unlike a lot of the other stuff, when we did a sing through, you think, oh well, this could be short, you know, whatever. The Foxhunt has remained almost identical since 2015. In the two previous operas I'd written, there were very few sort of traditional arias that are standalone, and that I think was frustrating to me in a weird way. But it was also how I felt that the drama of those pieces needed to work. So in this particular case, I did have a few moments, and where Nick and I agreed that there could be a moment not of her being aggressive and moving through us like a shark, but where she actually has a moment of repose. And there's only one of them really, which is when she's talking about her horse, which is sort of the whole point. And we stuck it right before the Foxhunt, which is the most terrifying, you know, thing compositionally and also visually, and right after this garden party gone wrong. So the garden party gone wrong starts very pleasant, and the chorus is almost, you know, just it's incredibly old-fashioned. Everyone's in ball gowns, and then it ends with this enormous fight between the two brothers and people coming in, and there's this random aria from the mother, and it's all kind of chaos. And then out of that, the kind of dust clears, and we have things happen, and projection happens. And then we're in this totally neutral, and it's a sense like the palette is cleansed, and she sings about how much she loves her horse. In the middle of that, we have a sense of clouds coming over it. Again, these big registral extremes, where she's saying, I know he'll never hurt me, I'll know he'll never disappoint me. Big descending things, and that they're meant to give her a certain power there, right? Where she's, I am in control of this situation.